Good morning, Team Alabama. Please join me in reading in Hatchet on page 144. The noise awakened him. It was a low sound, a low roaring sound that came from the wind. His eyes snapped open, not because it was loud, but because it was new. He had felt wind in his shelter and felt the rain that came with the wind and had heard thunder many times in the past 47 days. But not this noise. Low, almost alive, almost from a throat somehow, the sound, the noise was a roar, a far-off roar, but coming at him. And when he was fully awake, he sat up in the darkness, grimacing with the pain from his ribs. The pain was different now, a tightening pain, and it seemed less, but the sound so strange, he thought. A mystery sound, a spirit sound, a bad sound. He took some small wood and got the fire going again. Felt some little comfort and cheer from the flames, but also felt that he should get ready. He did not know how, but he should get ready. The sound was coming for him and just for him, and he had to get ready. The sound wanted him. He found the spear and the bow where they were hanging on the pegs of the shelter wall and brought his weapons to the bed. He had made the pine boughs. More comfort, but like the comfort of the flames, it didn't work with his new threat that he didn't understand yet. Restless threat, he thought, and stood out of the shelter away from the flames to study the sky, but it was too dark. The sound meant something to him. Something from his memory, something that he had read about, something that he had seen on television, something. Oh, he thought, oh no. It was wind like the sound of a train with the low belly roar of a train. It was a tornado. That was it. The roar of the train meant that bad wind, and it was coming for him. God, he thought, and on top of the moose, not this. But it was too late to do anything, and in the strange stillness, he looked to the night sky and then turned back into the shelter and was leaning over to go through the door opening when it hit. Later, he would think of it and find that it was the same as the moose. Just insanity. He was taken in the back by some mad force and driven into the shelter on his face, slammed down into the pine branches of his bed. And at the same time, the wind tore at the fire and sprayed red coals and sparks in a cloud around him. And then it backed out, seemed to hesitate momentarily, and returned with a massive roar, and a roar that took his ears and mind and body. He was whipped against the front wall of the shelter like a rag, and felt a ripping pain in his ribs again, and then was hammered back down into the sand once more, while the wind took the whole wall, his bed, the fire, his tools, all of it, and threw it out into the lake. Gone, out of sight, gone forever. He felt a burning on his neck, and he reached up to find red coals there, and he pushed those off, found more in his pants and brushed those away, and the wind hit again, heavy gusts, tearing gusts. He heard trees snapping in the forest around the rock. He felt his body slipping out and clawed at the rocks to hold himself down. He couldn't think, he just held, and he knew that he was praying, but didn't know what the prayer was, and knew that he wanted to stay and be. And then the wind moved to the lake. Brian heard the great roaring, sucking sound of the water and opened his eyes to see the lake torn by the wind and the water slamming in great waves, and went in all the way and fought each other, and then rose in a spout of water going up into the night sky like a wet column of light. It was beautiful and terrible at the same time. The tornado tore one more time at the shore on the opposite side of the lake, and Brian could hear trees being ripped down. And then it was gone as rapidly as it had come. It left nothing but Brian in the pitch dark. He could find nothing of where his fire had been, and not a spark, nothing of his shelter, tools, or bed. Even the body of the fool bird was gone. I am back to nothing, he thought, trying to find things in the dark. Back to where I was when I crashed, hurt in the dark, just the same. As if to emphasize his thoughts, the mosquitoes with the fire gone and the protective smoke no longer saving him came back in thick, nostril-clogging swarms. All that was left was the hatchet at his belt. Still there, but now it began to rain, and in the downpour he would never find anything dry enough to get a fire going, and at last he pulled his battered body back in under the overhang where his bed had been and wrapped his arms around his ribs. Sleep couldn't come with the insects ripping at him. So he lay to the rest of the night, slapping mosquitoes and chewing with his mind on the day. This morning, he had been fat, well, almost fat, and happy, sure of everything, with good weapons and food, and the sun in his face, and things looking good for the future. And inside of one day, just one day, he had been run over by a moose and a tornado, had lost everything, and was back to square one, just like that. A flip of some giant coin, and he was the loser. But there is a difference, he thought. There really is a difference. I might be hit, but I am not done. When the light comes, I'll start to rebuild. I'll still have the hatchet, and that's all I had in the first place. Come on, he thought, baring his teeth in the darkness. Come on. Is that the best you can do? Is that all you can hit me with? A moose and a tornado? Well, he thought, holding his ribs and smiling and then spitting mosquitoes out of his mouth. Well, that won't get the job done. That was the difference now. He had changed, and he was tough. I am tough where it counts, tough in the head. In the end, right before dawn, a kind of cold snap came down. Something else new, this cold snap. And the mosquitoes settled back into the damp grass and under the leaves, and he could sleep or doze. And the last thought he had that morning, as he closed his eyes, was, I hope the tornado hit the moose. When he awakened, the sun was cooking the insides of his mouth and had dried his tongue to leather. He had fallen into a deeper sleep with his mouth open just at dawn, and it tasted as if he had been sucking on his foot all night. He rolled out and almost bellowed with pain from the ribs. They had tightened in the night and seemed to pull at his chest when he moved. He slowed his movements and stood slowly, without stretching unduly, and went to the lake for a drink. At the shore he kneeled carefully and with great gentleness and drank and rinsed his mouth. To his right he saw that the fish pond was still there, although the willow gate was gone and there were no fish. They'll come back, he thought, as soon as I can make a spear or bow and get 1 or 2 fish for bait. They'll come back. He turned to look at his shelter and saw that some of the wood for the wall was scattered around the beach, but was still there. Then he saw his bow jammed into a driftwood log, broken, but with the precious string still intact. Not so bad now, not so bad. He looked down the shoreline for other parts of his wall, and that's when he saw it. Out in the lake, in the short part of the L, something curved and yellow was sticking 6 or 8 inches out of the water. It was a bright color. Not an earth or natural color, and for a second he could not place it, and then he knew it for what it was. It's the tail of the plane, he said it aloud, half expecting to hear somebody answer. And there it was, sticking up out of the water. The tornado must have flipped the plane around somehow when it hit the lake, changed the position of the plane, and raised the tail. Well, he thought, well, just look at that. And at the same moment, a cutting thought hit him. He thought of the pilot still in the plane, and that brought a shiver and a massive sadness that seemed to settle on him like a weight, and he thought that he should say or do something for the pilot. Some words, but he didn't know any of those right words, the religious words. So he went down to the side of the water, and he looked at the plane and focused his mind, the way he did when he was hunting the fool birds, and he wanted to concentrate. He focused it on the pilot, and he thought, have rest forever. Chapter 17. He turned back to his campsite and looked to the wreckage. He had a lot to do. Rebuild his shelter, get a new fire going, find some wood, or get ready to find some wood, make weapons, and he had to work slowly because his ribs hurt. First things first. He tried to find some dry grass and twigs and then peeled bark from a nearby birch to shred into a fire nest. He worked slowly, but even so, with his new skill, he had a fire going in less than an hour. The flames cut the cool, damp morning, crackled, and did much to bring his spirits up, not to mention chasing away the incessant mosquitoes. With the fire going, he searched for dry wood, and the rain had driven water into virtually all the wood that he could find, and at last located some in a thick evergreen where the top branches had covered the lower dead ones, keeping them dry. He had great difficulty breaking them, not being able to pull much of his arm or chest muscles, but finally he got enough to keep the fire going all day and into the night. With that, he rested a bit and eased his chest, and then set about getting a shelter squared away. Much of the wood from his original wall was still nearby, and up in the back of the ridge he actually found a major section of the weave still intact. The wind had torn it out, lifted it, and thrown it to the top of the ridge, and Brian felt lucky once more that he had not been killed or more seriously injured, which would have been the same, he thought. If he couldn't hunt, he would die, and if he were injured badly, he would not be able to hunt. He jerked and dragged wood around until the wall was once more in place, crudely, but he could improve it later. He had no trouble finding enough pine boughs to make a new bed. The storm had torn the forest to pieces, and up in the back of the ridge it looked like a giant had become angry and used some kind of massive meat grinder on the trees. Huge pines were twisted and snapped off, blown sideways. The ground was so littered with limbs and tree tops sticking every which way that it was hard to get through. He pulled enough thick limbs in for a bed, and green and spicy with the new broken up sap smell. And by evening he was exhausted and hungry and hurting, but he had something close to a place to live again, a place to be. Okay, we're going to stop there for today. Team Alabama, have a great rest of your day. Add a few facts to your page at this time, and we will see you again tomorrow.